Man, they get to pastor, get to teacher, get to preacher. Them a leecher, me a bleacher. Get your feature, man a reacher. Them a sleeper, them stay up on the surface. Man go deeper, true believer, man a dreamer. See the steam all a flow out of the heater. Man a speaking the parables like a beeper. Keep climbing at your run, and you're getting steeper. Now me see clearer, bad mind pastor in the church. Now me see clearer, clearer. Now me see clearer. Them say them love Jesus.
give you dreams to deceive you.
Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Thank you so much for your patience. My name is Marlon Anton James, and I'll be serving as your chairperson this evening. At this point, I invite you to stand for the opening prayer, which is going to be done by Mr. Ronnie Daniel, Program Officer with the University of the West Indies Global Campus in Vincent the Grenadines, after which we'll remain standing for a rendition of our national anthem.
Thank you, Sister Marla. Let's just spend a moment in silence as we give God thanks for this opportunity to be here, but also as we recall to mind those who have passed in the last few weeks and months, and particularly those who would have been here under normal circumstances. We also want to remember one of our own staff, Miss Harry, who passed on earlier this year, and those known to you and your families. Let us spend a moment in silence. May their souls rest in peace. Let us pray. Eternal God, we give you thanks and praise for this wonderful opportunity we have to celebrate your love, to celebrate your providence, to celebrate your gift of humankind, to celebrate the gift of your church on earth. We thank you for the privilege we have to come to this gathering. We thank you for life and for all the opportunities that life offers to us to grow in the fullness of your love. We thank you for the church that has been, from time immemorial, a source of strength and guidance, your representative on earth. Indeed, we thank you for the faithful, for those who have demonstrated in the past and continue to do so great faith and perseverance. Those who have spread the gospel of your Son Jesus Christ across seas and lands and among peoples. Indeed, even as we are disturbed by the realities in the Middle East, Palestine, as we see the carnage, we also pray for hope and for peace, that your peoples will come together in the interest of our one human race. Bless us now as we reflect on the church in St. Vincent and its development, its impact, and for its guidance over the centuries. We thank you for those who shall present through their research, and we thank you for those who will engage the material with their questions and comments. Now we ask you to guide our deliberations, and may this time of reflection be to your glory and to your honor and to the upliftment of all of us. This and the prayers of our hearts we lift up to you through Christ our Lord. Amen.
Thank you very much, Ronnie, for inviting God's presence here this evening. And now we have a rendition of the national anthem of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Please be seated. Thank you very much. At this point, I acknowledge the presence of Dr. the Honorable Godwin Friday, Leader of the Opposition, His Excellency Francisco Perez Santana, Ambassador of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela to St. Vincent and the Grenadines, the Honorable Fitz Bramble, Parliamentary Representative for East Kingstown, Reverend Philip Daly, Superintendent for the Kingstown Chateaubelair Circuit in the Methodist Church. I see Zoila Ellis-Brown, President of the Garifuna Heritage Foundation, and Mr. Dwight Venner, brother to Sir Dwight Venner. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to welcome you to the Sir Dwight Venner Independence Lecture, hosted by the University of the West Indies Global Campus in Vincent and the Grenadines. Tonight, we gather under the theme, Rock of Ages, the making of the Vincentian Church, quite a fitting tribute to Sir Dwight Venner's enduring legacy. Of course, Sir Dwight Venner was not only a distinguished graduate of the University of the West Indies, but also served as the governor of the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank, the ECCB, for an impressive 26 years, making him the world's longest-serving bank governor at the time of his retirement in December 2015. His visionary leadership and inventiveness transformed the ECCB, enhancing its stature and service across the region. In this lecture tonight, we'll hear from 4 esteemed Vincentian historians who will provide an in-depth exploration of our religious origins and the struggles faced by the Spiritual Baptist Church. This discussion is particularly significant at a time when St. Vincent and the Grenadines unanimously enacted, the Parliament of St. Vincent and the Grenadines unanimously enacted legislation recognizing May 21st as a public holiday in honor of the Spiritual Baptist faith. I think we're all in for a treat tonight. And once again, I thank you for joining us. With that said, I now invite to deliver the welcome remarks the newly installed head of site of the UWI Global Campus in Vincent and the Grenadines, Dr. Risa Noel Barnett. Please welcome her as she comes.
Dr. the Honorable Godwin Friday, Leader of the Opposition, the Honorable Fitzgerald Bramble, His Excellency Francisco Perez Santana, Ambassador of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela to St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Reverend Philip Delaney, Superintendent for the Kingstown Chateaubelair Circuit and Methodist Church. I also acknowledge the presence of Mrs. Zoila Ellis-Brown, President of the Garifuna Foundation, our other esteemed persons, ladies and gentlemen, our presenters, the media, good evening. It is with great honor and profound gratitude that I welcome you to the Sir Dwight Venner Independence Memorial Lecture held here at the University of the West Indies Global Campus, St. Vincent and the Grenadines site to commemorate a leader who exemplified commitment to economics, innovation, and the betterment of our Caribbean society. A Vincentian by birth, an economist by training, Sir Dwight Venner served as the governor of the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank from December 1989 to November 2015. He was the longest-serving governor of any central bank, monetary authority, or Federal Reserve in the world. He was educated at the University of the West Indies, and I have to make a plug for that, Mona Campus, Jamaica, where he obtained both a Bachelor of Science and a Master of Science degree in economics. He served as a junior research fellow at the Institute of Social and Economic Research at the University of the West Indies, and then as a lecturer in economics from 1974 to 1981. One of the ways this site continues to connect with the community is through the renaming of special lectures in recognition of prominent Vincentians such as Dwight Venner and Oscar Allen. This year marks a significant milestone in our nation's history as we celebrate the 45th anniversary of independence under the inspiring theme, 45 Years of Togetherness, Prosperity, and Perseverance. It is a time when we not only reflect on the remarkable journey of our nation, but also pay tribute to our shared culture, heritage, and resilience. Tonight, we are delighted to have a distinguished panel of presenters who will delve into the thought-provoking topic, Rock of Ages, the making of the Vincentian Church. This topic invites us to explore the profound influence that religious institutions have on our history, social fabric, and our cultural identities. As we engage with these presentations, let us reflect upon the multifaceted roles that churches have played historically and continue to play in our day-to-day lives. I would like to take this opportunity to express my heartfelt gratitude to the staff of the University of the West Indies Global Campus, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, particularly Ms. Sharon Garway, our acting marketing assistant. I assumed the position of head of site on October 1st, 2024, and observed Ms. Garway's efforts in preparing for this event. Sharon, your passion and commitment to bringing together our community for meaningful discussions exemplify the very spirit of perseverance we celebrate today. Yes, please give a round of applause. Thank you all for being here, and let us engage with enthusiasm and openness as we honor both the legacy of Sir Dwight Venner and the rich cultural heritage outlined by our soon-to-be speakers. Welcome and enjoy the evening. Thank you.
We thank you very much, Dr. McManus. Another round of applause, please, for our newly installed head of site. And this evening, we're happy to have with us a representative of the Ministry of Culture. Of course, the ministry plays a vital role in preserving and promoting our rich cultural heritage. And we invite to speak at this time Ms. Radhika Stephen, representing the Ministry of Culture. Please put your hands together.
Dr. the Honorable Godwin Friday, Leader of the Opposition, His Excellency Francisco Perez Santana, Ambassador of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela to St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Reverend Philip Delaney, Superintendent for the Kingstown Chateaubelair Circuit of the Methodist Church, other parliamentary representatives, or distinguished guests, good evening. It is an honor to bring greetings on behalf of the cultural official at the Department of Culture in the Ministry of Tourism, Civil Aviation, Sustainable Development, and Culture. This evening, it is with great anticipation that we are here to listen to our four panelists present on the topic, Rock of Ages, the making of the Vincentian Church. Church, for most Vincentians, provides the foundation of their being and their becoming. They treat it as a priority for privileged spiritual position, which positively impacts their physical lives. While certain religions were passed down to us, Others were born in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Nevertheless, all refer to God as the highest spiritual being, regardless of the church they attend. For this reason, the majority of Vincentians turn to God for comfort. In reality, some people instinctively invoke God when seeking solutions to their problems, even though they do not believe in religion or God. How often have you heard them call on the name of the Lord through familiar words such as Jesus, or Oh God, or My God, when someone is impacted by something over which they have no control? This represents a call for help, a subconscious call for help from the Supreme Being, ever present, ever sure, in spite of their unbelief. Furthermore, many of us still do not fully understand church and religion and their role in our nation building. Thus, this is why the Department of Culture in the Ministry of Tourism, Civil Aviation, Sustainable Development and Culture is always pleased to partner with the global campus of the University of the West Indies on activities of this nature, activities which seek to provide a greater depth of understanding. For Christians, Rock of Ages serves as a reminder of their faith and the power that comes from God. We anticipate that all who participate in this discussion titled Rock of Ages, the Making of the Vincentian Church, will leave more knowledgeable about this vital subject. I look forward to a robust discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Stephen, for your remarks, and we're moving along quite nicely. We're now on to a presentation, the remembrance of Dr. Edward L. Cox.
Thank you very much, Chair. Good evening, everyone. Dr. Edward L. Cox was a Grenadian historian who passed recently. He is married, or was married, to a Vincentian, the Nantons, which makes him the relatives of the Griffiths. We want to remember Dr. Cox because he spent a lot of time working on St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Not to bore you with academic and bibliographical details, most of you would know about King Jaja, who came to St. Vincent, and he worked extensively on King Jaja, also on the liberated Africans. Could we all stand for a moment in memory of Professor Cox, who taught at Rice University, and his contribution to our Vincentian civilization. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you very much, Dr. Scott. It's now my distinct honor to introduce a remarkable figure in our community, Kenneth Vibrating Skates Aline. He's known for his vibrant contributions in the cultural landscape, and we all know his popular Independence tune. So without further ado, please put your hands together and welcome the Vibrating Skates.
Oh yeah, 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 yeah. Oh yeah, oh yeah. I was cheated out of my homeland, abandoned across the Caribbean. Garifuna faced great pain and suffering. Victimized by the laws of attrition, treated as if I was a human. Garifuna's spirit was never ever broken. With all the hatred, spite, and malicious rumor, good will conquer in my high runa. Oh, what a day of rejoicing. My resistance is now stronger than ever, so tell the adversaries, don't run for cover. Shout USA, rise up, for the new is born in. Garifuna lives, Garifuna lives. Garifuna lives at the heart of our heritage. Garifuna lives. Garifuna lives. Garifuna lives. Reparation for every tongue and village. Panama, 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 Panama. Oh yeah, 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 yeah. Oh yeah, oh yeah. I defend this land from invaders to protect Caribbean African cultures. Garifuna will last to face colonization. From Chateauet to Ebenezer, patriots and them social warriors, Garifuna courage succeeded against aggression. My wattle and dab, or call it hall and chamber, is now big mansion spread all over. Oh, what a day of rejoicing. Cocoa tea and bush, I always love the flavor, but they rob me out of my native culture. Chateauet say, rise up, for a new day is dawning. Garifuna lives. Garifuna lives. Garifuna lives at the heart of our heritage. Garifuna lives. Garifuna lives. Garifuna lives. Reparation for every tongue and village. Panama, 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 Panama. Oh yeah, 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 yeah. Oh yeah, oh yeah. Some trying hard to confuse me with plenty radio stations and TV, but Garifuna gone, computerized already. Recording studios in every alley, telephone to make the place come messy, while Garifuna hitting on the internet steadily. From Belize, Honduras to Guatemala, the spirit is alive no more than ever. Oh, what a day of rejoicing. Before Columbus came to discover, Africans link up with Mother Hiruna. Chateauet say, rise up, for a new day is dawning. Garifuna lives. Garifuna lives. Garifuna lives at the heart of our heritage. Garifuna lives. Garifuna lives. Garifuna lives. Reparation for every tongue and village. Woo! What a day. Woo! Thank you. That song was from 1997, the 200th anniversary of the Garifuna being exiled from St. Vincent. So that was the only song about that year. So, happy to do it here. So we go from 1997 to 1984. 1984 was 150 years of emancipation. That's what we were celebrating that time. So I'm always unlucky to be the person writing a song about the event, historical event. Give your boy a round of applause for that. Since the year 1834, emancipation opened the door. From slavery to independence, we fight in the dread conditions. Rise up against racism, break down colonialism, pursuing freedom totally on that painful road to liberty. Now the life we live and the love we give is only 190 years. We must fight to protect our rights, cause the enemies of progress don't want to see us unite. They be la la la, la 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 la. Riots, wars, and revolution was a period of full freedom, like the rights to vote at elections, trade union recognition, Legalized Baptist worship coming out of the closet. From 80% illiteracy down to 10% in some countries. Now the life we live and the love we give is only 190 years. We must fight to protect our rights, cause the enemies of progress don't want to see us unite. They will da la 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 la. We must not forget our roots, patriots and heroes of truth, like Toussaint and Marcus Garvey, Morris Bishop and Walter Rodney, Captain Kojo and Butler, raised black consciousness higher. Their blood, sweat and tears were shed so that we can hold up our heads. Now the life we live and the love we give was only 190 years. We must fight to protect our rights, cause the enemies of freedom don't want to see us unite. La 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 la. Hey! This verse is for the university. Are we here? We here? Right. Liberation is everywhere. People's rights for you to share. Regardless to your ambition, try to get education. The power in our people lies in knowledge, wisdom, and struggle. The good, the bad, the indifferent. Justice is all we really want. Now the life we live and the love we give is only 190 years. We must fight to protect our rights, cause the enemies of progress don't want to see us unite. Yo! Woo! Wow, wow, wow. This is a good night. Very good night indeed. 1979 was a big year. And I see a lot of colors represented here. Doc, you're wearing blue. Doc, you're wearing green. Marley, you have all the colors. Wow, beautiful there. It's looking dark blue, it's all right. You can get away. Right, so we seem to be good tonight. We're going to have a good time, but in spite of a good time, I just want to say, when we talk about spiritual Baptist, my grandmother was a spiritual Baptist. And I'm a kind of mixed-up person. When I say mixed-up, grandfather from Barbados, that's where the Aline come from. Father from Trinidad, he was a Roma. And St. Vincent. But my roots in St. Vincent is Trumaka, North Leeward. So big up for North Leeward. Any North Leeward posse? Beautiful. North Leeward in the house. And my grandmother had her own prayer tent with coconut straw on the roof. I was about 5 or 6 going down to visit her when the holidays come. And she was like a rebel. Because in those days, well, not when I visited, but when she started, you couldn't have Baptist service. Baptist was being locked up and all this kind of thing. So that's why I became rebellious from the heritage. But I do a little kind rebellion, right? A sober one. We are all moving on together. So we must plan collectively for a brighter day. No one knows what's in store for the future. True dedication can get us there. Do we believe that? Everybody believe that? True dedication from 79 to this, 45 years. Give yourself a round of applause. We survived the trip. It wasn't an easy trip. Independence is a milestone in our march to prosperity. Now St. Vincent and the Grenadines have a real nationality. We are a nation of many races and have tried hard to integrate. The strength of so many faces shall be the prospect in our faith. So in this moment of history, tell it in every community, our nation is born. Colonialism is gone. This is a time of national freedom, so share love with someone the 27th dawn of October. Our nation is born. One history, one ecstasy, one destiny for all are we. Hey, 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 hey. La 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 la, can't hear you. Da. While we take this stand as a nation, let us not forget our past. For this future we praise our heroes who fought slavery to the last. Special honors to Marcus Garvey, his sacrifice gave us all a chance. And all the men who fought in this country to give us this day of independence. So in this moment of history, sing, tell it in every community, our nation is born. Colonialism is gone. This is a time of national freedom, so share love with someone the 27th dawn of October. Our nation is born. One history, one ecstasy, one destiny for all are we. Hey, 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 hey. Da 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 da. Do some manipulate the franchise of world adult suffrage? There's still hope of a bright tomorrow for all the underprivileged. Let love excel our wishes. Advancement needs plenty of work. Remember back his death for the nation that opposed this action and lots of talk. So in this moment of history, tell it in every community, our nation is born. Colonialism is gone. Zola, this is a time of national freedom. So share love with someone the 27th dawn of October. Our nation is born. One history, one ecstasy, one destiny for all are we. Hey, 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 hey. Da-ba-da-da-da, da-ba-da-da-da. Could you stand up now? And hold hands, even if they're pointing like the person next to you. Hold hands with that person. My people, join hand in hand now. Put your differences aside. Get your hearts and souls together. We got to build this nation with pride. Work in harmony with good leaders. Never elect no one here to rule. Then we can feel at home like good comrades. Our people must not be election tools. So in this moment of history, tell it in every community. Sing, sing, colonialism is gone. This is a time of national freedom, so share love with someone the 27th dawn of October. Our nation is born. One history, one ecstasy, one destiny for all are we. Hey, 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 hey. Da 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 da, da 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 da. Oh yeah! Woo!
Well, when I introduced Skates, I didn't realize we were in for a free concert. A mini concert. All right, put your hands once again together for Vibrating Skates. There's so much history in that presentation. We move on now, and to do the first presentation is Dr. Cleve Scott, who earned his undergraduate and doctoral degrees at the UWI, Cave Hill, and has been teaching there since, while also serving the regional NGO movement. He is also renowned as a sound engineer and music producer, having worked on the global hit Turn Me On by Vincent Kevin Little. That's just a little peek into Dr. Cleve Scott. So at this time, we invite him to set the context of this evening's lecture. Dr. Cleve Scott.
Thank you very much, Marla. And I have to greet members of the audience. Congratulations to Dr. Risa Noel McBurnett and your elevation. We worked at the Ministry of Culture, and in my days as a teacher, she used to slip my files to the top, so I thank her for the assistance. I recognize the leader of the opposition, Dr. Friday, who is a historian and who I grudge because he had the privilege to work with one of the greatest ever, and he has since passed away. And my good friend, Fitz Bramble. I also want to greet from Trinidad and Tobago, the retired lecturer, Stand Dr. Claudius Fergus, Stand Dr. Fergus, retired from St. Augustine. Tomorrow night, he'll be launching a book at the Botanic Gardens, and the book, incidentally, is dealing with something similar to what we're doing here. So the very first time, he's going to hear how we are different from him, and perhaps in the second edition, he's going to credit us. Now, this work that we are doing is through the inspiration and the organization of the government of St. Vincent and Grenadines. Dr. McBurnett was the permanent secretary, so she knows that I'm a very troublesome fella. But at the end of the day, what comes out is good. So, having gone through this process, we decided it is not just good enough for it to be on the shelf and the public have to wait 3 or 4 years in order to read it, okay? And the Global Campus kindly agreed that we should have the opportunity to make a presentation here. The objective is not to question Christianity or any church. The objective is not to say a church is good or bad. It is to outline to you the struggles of people of African descent in St. Vincent and the Grenadines to decolonize Christianity, to reshape Christianity within their own image. The evidence we are presenting to you, we did not make it up. A lot of it, we relied on the autobiographies of members of the Wesleyan Church, now we call it the Methodist Church. We relied as well on reports from the Missionary Society. We relied on colonial documents. And fortunately for us, when Dr. Denny comes to the podium, and when I come back, you're going to see that these documents allowed our people to speak in their own words. We don't think that the colonial authorities and the missionaries at the time knew that what they were doing, but we are seeing people speaking in what the Jamaicans call patois, in what Camo Brathwaite, the great West Indian literary critic and poet, calls nation language, and what we've essentially like to call broken English, right? And if you're familiar with the Jamaican Louise Bennett, she says it is our tongue. It is not any corruption of the English. So that is the objective here, that you will see how, in particular, the spiritual Baptists emerge in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Some persons say it started in Trinidad, but we think that what we have here will demonstrate overwhelmingly that there was a movement in St. Vincent. We are not arguing about the Trinidad movement or the Grenada movement, but we are saying that at the time when we see spiritual Baptists in St. Vincent, the only other place that had something similar was in St. Kitts. So that is what we want to do here tonight. Thank you very much, Chair, and we'll go with the first presenter.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Scott, for setting the context. And we move on now to Dr. Michael Denny, and in a similar fashion, I'll just tell you a little bit about Dr. Denny. Good, so Dr. Gary Michael Denny is also a UWI alumni, Cave Hill, who moved to Johns Hopkins University for his PhD, specializing in African history, and is renowned for his speech writing for the legendary freedom fighter, later South Africa President Nelson Mandela. It's a privilege for us to have tonight Dr. Denny as we welcome him at this time for his presentation, Liberation, Theology of the Enslaved.
Good night, everyone. I'm happy for you to be here. I'm also happy to be here. I work with these young men, and I rely on them enormously for all kinds of stuff and so on. And I hope that sometimes I make a useful contribution and so on. But I'll tell you this, okay, and particularly Dr. Scott and Dr. Fraser have an encyclopedic, knowledge of Vincentian history. And I intervene at points where I am, surprised at some of the stuff that I see. Okay, and I suppose I can tell you that the reason why we are here today with this particular topic that we are presenting today, it has to do with my astonishment of what was revealed to me by my colleagues. We have in front of us, let me read this, and I'll tell you why I have been astonished, utterly astonished. And we are giving this lecture today. After meeting at Chateaubriand on 26 December 1825, Fiddler wrote in his diary at length about the responses from the enslaved congregation. Many of the slaves spoke with much feeling and propriety. Castilla, an old leader, could scarcely find utterance for some time, till at length his words seemed to outdo the eloquence of his silent tears. According to Fiddler, Castilla, who was a cooper, said, "God preserves me, and I'm glad I can do a little for my master and a little for myself." And he concluded by praying that God would nourish me heart a little more, give me more strength. Give me more strength to fight this battle, that I come off more than. If you could bring it up a little. I come off more than conquer for Christ's sake. Amen. Well, that is an extract of a longer sermon. I call it Fiddler's Sermon. And I was utterly astonished, and I will tell you why. But in the text that we are writing, I will read to you some of my first responses to Fiddler's sermon, which is much longer than the piece that we are citing, just for your convenience, and for you to understand what is it that triggered me. I entitled this piece, within our text, it is entitled Triumphant Methodism Among Enslaved Vincentians. So I speak of it being a triumphant kind of sensibility, that there's something within this sermon that demonstrates within the mindset of enslaved Vincentians and the persons given the sermon, that they see themselves as conquering, as achieving something great. So we want to understand that, okay? I also have a different subtitle, which I refer to as the first Black Vincentian Christian community. We got to understand it as well, because to speak about, the origins of Christianity in St. Vincent, we got to begin from the beginning, okay? And to understand what is it in St. Vincent today that links Black Vincentian Christians, we have to push right back to the past to understand that umbilical cord that bring all Vincentian Christians into the same kind of what we might call Christian community. We got to understand that. We cannot do this without going to the beginning, okay? And so I wrote, in the early 19th century, the spread of Methodism among enslaved Vincentians greatly exceeded the growth in neighboring slave societies. Something is special about St. Vincent. For example, in 1817, there were 2,700 Methodists in St. Vincent slave population, whereas Barbados had 50. We could do simple arithmetic and division. I went to Catholic school. That's a big gap. Between 50 and 2,700, that's a huge gap. There's something going on in St. Vincent. In fact, the triumph of the Methodist missionaries in winning so many converts among enslaved Vincentians would draw the attention of several observers, particularly the Vincentian planter class, who praised the missionaries for providing a shining example of how the Methodists could pursue their fundamental Christian imperative of seeking to save the souls of enslaved Vincentians, while at the same time creating a more docile slave population. This presumed docility of enslaved Vincentians, however, was more apparent than real. For while it is certainly true that the planter class attributed the low incidence of violent slave resistance in St. Vincent and the Grenadines to the work of the missionaries, rather than the fact that there was overwhelming military power that they possessed, the religious imagination of enslaved Vincentians shatters this illusion of docility. What I'm indicating here to you is when you read the sermon, when you read the full scale of what this man has to say, what you're getting a peep into is the religious imagination of enslaved Vincentians, from enslaved Vincentians. Fiddler, who attended a prayer meeting of enslaved Vincentians, shows that they were deeply engaged in developing and propagating a religious and ideological philosophy that was a searing critique of slavery and a defense of their own humanity. This sermon is of extraordinary significance for several reasons. And this I did not include in the text because new thoughts came to me today and I added them. So we're going to have to see if my colleagues decide to throw them away. But first, it stands among the rarest of assets in Vincentian and Caribbean history, coming as close as we can to actually hearing the voice of the enslaved. At this time, no recording technologies existed to capture the human voice anywhere in the world. Without Fiddler, we have no genuine idea of the sound of a Vincentian voice 200 years ago. But Fiddler took down the utterances word for word, and he spelled the words exactly as they sounded. In doing so, he allows us to access the grammar, the rhythm, and the vocabulary of freedom, suffering, pain, and joy that our foreparents enunciated. When we hear Fiddler, when we read Fiddler, we are hearing the voice of the enslaved Vincentians 200 years ago. You're hearing it now. Second, what a revelation. Because what emerges from the mouth of the enslaved is a profound and urgent theology of liberation that is utterly incompatible with the theology of submission that the planter class required of the Methodist missionaries. And it surely explains why Methodism grew in popularity among the enslaved in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Both the vocabulary of salvation and the dream of liberation intoxicated the congregants who understood better than anyone else. If humanity is sinful, slavery must be one of the greatest sins. So through the voice of this enslaved black Vincentian pastor, preacher, whatever name we decide to ascribe to him, Fiddler himself is bearing witness to what is nothing less than a fundamental confrontation between the white planter class and the black Vincentians on where black Vincentians stand before the throne of God. This is the beginning of the racial schism in Vincentian Christianity. From the planter class perspective, heaven has a hierarchy. There's God, there's the angels, and there's everyone else. And if there's a hierarchy in heaven, then the preacher class, the white planter class argued, then that must be replicated on earth. So hence, masters and slaves. The problem is, our forebears, they rejected that theology. In fact, all Vincentian denominations today bear testimony to this truth articulated by the black Vincentian Christians with a very simple proclamation: the equality of all souls in the eyes of God. Whereas we had the preacher class making the case, the white preachers, that there's a master and there's a servant. And within the church themselves, that hierarchy had to be respected. For black Vincentians, who are the enslaved, they responded in an entirely different way. This is because enslaved Vincentians believe that equality existed as an act of God, not of man. Hence, they also believe that it is humans who created a world of division, hierarchy, and slavery. For them, this divine dispensation that recognizes human frailty, human imperfection, also offers all humans, both black and white, slave and free, the opportunity to be redeemed and purified because they are all the recipients of God's grace, whether black or white, whether slave or free. The preacher's invocation of God's grace as an umbrella that would shelter black Vincentians is a crucial window to the theology of liberation that inspired black congregants. Through the embrace of this concept, God's grace, the preacher elevated enslaved Vincentians to the same state of moral agency as the planters themselves, with the equal capacity to know and to participate in the divine benevolence bestowed to the believers in Christ. In this theology of equality, enslaved Vincentians preached that if they were not greater than whites, neither were they lesser. This is a religious and ideological philosophy that is completely opposed to the white supremacist principles that underpinned Vincentian slave society. Crucially, in this theology of liberation, enslaved Vincentians preach that God had gifted them the virtues of patience and forbearance. In a world that tested their capacity to endure the tribulations imposed upon them as enslaved people, these were formidable and necessary assets. You need patience, you need forbearance in the face of the brutality of slavery. Hence, this particular ideology was a frontal assault on the legitimacy and the durability of slavery without ever using the word slavery. In all of the sermons that you would read, enslaved Vincentians do not mention slavery. But once you do a dive, a subterranean arc, you go beneath the words themselves, you see what they're actually confronting is the urgency, the brutality of slavery. That's what they're condemning. Double entendre, we call it today, when we sing calypsos with 2 or 3 meanings. Our enslaved Vincentians understood that very, very well. And so they knew that patience was necessary. Slavery might not end now. It might not end tomorrow, but it will end. And in fact, as we all know, it did end. So they were right. This triumphant theology captures why enslaved Vincentians could and did embrace Methodism. For whereas the Methodist missionaries measured religious success by the number of enslaved Vincentians to Methodism, enslaved Vincentians measured success by the religion's capacity to allow them to create a theology that made the world intelligible. Their solicitations for divine intervention in their lives offered a critique of slavery. It accorded dignity to the enslaved. It defended their humanity. And it articulated a promise of liberation in the here and the now, rather than in the hereafter. There's a crucial point to understand. As a gospel of salvation, as a religion of salvation, the fundamental claim that Christians make is that to go to heaven, you got to die first. You got to die to go to heaven. There's nothing wrong with the theology in and of itself. There are, a billion people believe in it, and so on. But this contrasts sharply with the African conceptions of faith and the relationship between the believers and their faith. In the African conception of faith, you believe in the faith because you're rewarded now. Your health, your wealth, your children, whether the rains fall, whether you get sick, all the wonderful things that happen in the here and now represent a direct intervention on the part of the divinities into your lives in the here and now. Okay? And so you have this understanding of deferred reward coming through Christianity and the notion of immediate reward coming through the traditional African understanding of faith. And so what we see happening here is that in the instance of slavery, enslaved Vincentians decided we can construct a theology that binds both of them, that allows us to say, we believe that we will go to heaven when we die. But we can see if we could achieve heaven on earth as well by ending slavery. So we could do both. Okay? So this hybrid feature, combining African principles and Christian principles, would be a feature of the Vincentian Church as it would elaborate in the years to come. So whereas Methodists constructed a philosophy that preached submission to the slave masters, enslaved Vincentians created a Methodism for the enslaved, not the enslavers. Now, in the practice of their faith, one can distinguish between theology, the principles of faith, and liturgy, the processes through which you demonstrate, your joy, your worship, your submission, your engagement with the divine power. Okay, and the theological confrontation was not always visible and immediate to the planter class. There's a certain kind of what you might call disguise that enslaved Vincentians were able to put in place when they preached as they did. This is not something that the planters always saw, always heard, or would recognize. However, the liturgy, the way you practice your faith, that was entirely different. The most visible and audible demonstration of the African underpinnings of Methodism was the forms of worship. That the planters could see. Fiddler observed this freedom with which they worshipped. He saw them singing. He saw them praying. He saw them preaching. And above all, they communed with one another. In Fiddler's words, he said they communed freely. Freely meant unconstrained by the kind of what the white church would have called decencies. They danced. They experienced possession, where within Christianity as a faith, there's the principle that the Holy Ghost could enter the human body and that you can be possessed in that fashion. But actually practicing it, that had essentially disappeared from more conservative demonstrations of faith within the white Christian church, not Africans. Because this was consistent as well with other African practices of faith, where you can be possessed. Whether one is looking at, we can use examples, whether in Haiti or in Cuba, in other parts where the divinity can enter your body, and you can, in effect, for that moment, become divine. So this notion of thoroughly engaging in a form of worship where you spoke in tongues, so to speak, to use a biblical reference, even though it was fundamentally Christian, it was one which had become frowned upon by the traditional, Methodist Church and others, not black enslaved Vincentians. And so this was thought to be too African, too offensive. And again, this was one of the confrontations we see emerging between black Christianity and white Christianity, let's call it that, in St. Vincent. But at the same time, we have to understand what this meant. This was an exaltation of God. And in this exaltation of God, enslaved Vincentians experienced a religious exultation that is immeasurable. These two words are kind of tricky. One is exalt with the A. Exalt, you exalt God. But the one is, it's a you, exult. So you have exalt. So you experience, happiness that is immeasurable. But you arrive at that position through your exaltation of God. Okay? And liberation theology has often been framed as a kind of assault, and necessarily so, against broader oppressive regimes within which the enslaved lived. But what I have also begun to consider, the actual experience of faith, which brought tremendous joy to the enslaved Africans, that in and of itself also constituted liberation, because it was beyond the capacity of the slave masters to control. And it brought a communion among the worshippers, which gave them a happiness, gave them a bonds, which for many would be unbreakable. And so these sights and songs of Africa offended the European Christian sensibility, because whereas they may never have heard or understood the racial theology of black Vincentians, they could see, hear, and be moved and be offended by watching black Vincentians at worship. This worship also provided other kinds of necessary assistance to the journey of life. People were christened through their commitment to the faith. They attended weddings as part of their commitment to the faith. Funerals. These are huge moments in the trajectory of a human life, okay, which in the absence of Christianity and where we have black people living in Africa, all of these would have been acknowledged moments of your life in which different types of religious observances would have been embraced as part of acknowledging our passage to the world. And so what you see is that in the absence of other kinds of religious endeavors, these key life moments were also part of how black Vincentians expressed their Christianity. So the final point I'm going to make, because I'm not sure how much time is going, okay, and we have a couple of the men to speak, okay. What are the legacies of this, foundational moment in Vincentian history when we have the first, I would say, elaboration of the idea of a black church, okay? Well, the phenomenon of mass conversion meant that what had begun as a white faith when the Methodist preachers entered in the late 18th century, 1780s, I think, Cleve? 1783, 87, okay, quickly became a black church. Because if we, and this one is actually quite simple. We have the precise number somewhere as to how many white people are living in St. Vincent in 1808. We know the numbers, okay? The enslaved people are far greater, okay? And as the enslaved Vincentians adopted this faith, then it means that in sheer numbers, it becomes a black faith, just by sheer numbers. Even if the hierarchy at the beginning is white, very quickly, this becomes a black faith by sheer numbers, okay? The second point is that today in St. Vincent, and well, I'll tell you, one of these stories really that I should, if you're in St. Vincent in 1980s, early 1980s, we are accustomed to Rastas. We are accustomed to spiritual Baptists. We are accustomed to Pentecostals. We're accustomed to all of these different, groups. And then suddenly, we had a new group. Muslims, black Muslims, wearing long stuff, selling groundnuts, and so on. And Vincentians we just accepted it. You were Rasta yesterday, you're Muslim today, that's cool. You were, black poor man, maybe 10 years earlier. All of that is still cool. We could live with all of that. What's going on? Because there's a peculiar African principle that was being expressed and continue to reside within the Vincentian population. African faiths were polytheistic, multiple divinities. Where multiple divinities exist, by definition, if we're going to live together without cutting off each other's throats or cutting off each other's heads, we got to live and let live. Okay? So tolerance was a fundamental part of the African experience of faith. Neighbors, we may celebrate the great God, the one God, but we also have special divinities, special ancestors to whom we pay observances, and we respect that. Okay? And so what you see happening in St. Vincent is that very early on, this kind of tolerance for multiple faiths, multiple denominations, became part of the Vincentian reality. So much so that it became what I call, there's a word which Christian and religious experts use called ecumenism, and that is the idea that all the churches constitute a single church, okay, and so on. Okay. Well, but in St. Vincent, we have Rastas and spiritual Baptists and Catholics and Shakers all maybe living in the same household. So our ecumenism was indigenized, part of what it means to be Vincentian, that we could live together. We may have all kinds of things that differentiate us, and we may get angry at each other over all kinds of stuff, but we never get angry about faith. In Europe, there's a history where hundreds of thousands of people were slaughtered for differences over faith. We see this happening elsewhere, even today, but not in St. Vincent. Okay? Because that residual power of tolerance, that is a Vincentian legacy that goes back to the very beginning of the birth of the Vincentian Christian Church. I would end it here.
Thank you very much, Dr. Denny, for that thought-provoking presentation. And ladies and gentlemen, I know that you must have your questions and comments, so I draw your attention to the open forum section a little lower on the program, at which time you'd have the opportunity to make your contributions. We're moving right along now. We have an item of entertainment by the Rose Hall Drummers. The Rose Hall Drummers. And as they come, we know that historically, drums have been integral to worship. So as we listen to the beats tonight and all of the rhythms, let's reflect on our cultural heritage and spiritual identity. Over to you, Rose Hall Drummers.
Bless the love. Jesus, are you? Jesus, are you? Yes, are you lead the way? Yes, are you lead the way? Here comes a man from Africa. Here comes a man from Africa. Here comes the man from Africa.
Here comes the man from Africa.
Here comes the man from Africa.
Here comes the man from Africa.
Here comes the man from Africa. He have a drum in his hand, mic in his hand, lyrics in the head and shang, shang, shang. Here comes the man from Africa. 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 They beat we, ill treat we, abuse we, misuse we. Here comes the man from Africa. 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 Give me back me gold. 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 Them left part them come from in our land. Carry away the garafuna, stick our land. Give me back me gold. Give me back me gold. Give me back me gold. They work us as slaves on them plantation. Where is our reparation? Give me back me gold. 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 Don't a baliso. Don't a baliso. It was down a baliso where them carry the Garafuna people. Down a baliso. Down a baliso. Down a baliso. Down a baliso. They carry mommy, carry daddy, carry body, carry sissy. Down a baliso. Down a baliso. Baliso rough, rough. Baliso rough, rough. Baliso rough, rough. Give me back me gold.
Well, at one point in that presentation, I just wanted to abandon my responsibility tonight and dance the night away to the Rose Hall Drummers. Thank you so much for that. We move on now with another presentation from Dr. Cleve Scott. This time, he'll be back to tell us about the origins of the spiritual Baptists.
Thank you very much, Chair. I will begin with an extract from a report in 1849. And I see some persons here who were in sixth form when I was in form in grammar school, and I know they don't Latin. Because Latin was still written on my report, but I don't know Latin. But I was reliably informed that imperium in imperium means an empire within an empire. That's how Reverend William Hudson, a Wesleyan minister, reported on what we now call the Spiritual Baptist in 1849. For those of you who are home, who cannot see what we have here, I will read it, what he said. He said, "From the first we clearly saw that an emporium in imperio would never do, and it is much to be regretted that our predecessors allowed such an organization within our societies, when at first, by the expulsion of the ringleaders, it might have been arrested. But being allowed to proceed with impunity, they became more insolent and determined and led many astray." This is overwhelming evidence that the Spiritual Baptists constituted an autonomous religious denomination or division or section or subsection within the Wesleyan Church by 1849. How did we get there? We're going to go back to the very beginning. Enslaved blacks, as Dr. Denny showed, in this country, in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, had an extraordinary attachment to the Wesleyan Church, particularly from around 1824, when William Fiddler came to St. Vincent. By that time, the Wesleyan Church played a critical role in the lives of blacks. They were the ministers, they acted as the physicians, the lawyers, the architects, the magistrates. And these are not my words, these are words in the report from the Wesleyans. The strong religious fervor among blacks continued during the period 1840 to 1860. Also during this time, the Anglican Church became a major competitor for non-white church attendees. And that's because during the period of enslavement, the Anglican Church was not attracted to blacks, enslaved people. The Wesleyan Church came during slavery, and that, perhaps we have argued, is why blacks were so attracted to the Wesleyan Church. A Wesleyan minister whose first assignment after being ordained was to St. Vincent and the Grenadines. He was shocked to the core of the widespread appeal of the Wesleyan Church. This is James Bickford. He said in his autobiography, hundreds upon hundreds could not get inside the building, but had to come within earshot on the outside. Of course, the modern-day Baptist churches and the evangelical churches, we know that. We put a speaker outside, right? And sometimes when you come in your church, you don't want to hear. But thank God now we have technology. We could go on Facebook and so on. Bickford, who had become a Wesleyan local preacher in 1835 in England, although he had been raised in the Church of England or the Anglican Church, also expressed his surprise at the theological thirst of local blacks. He wrote, "Such hunger for the word of God I have never seen before in England or elsewhere." Moreover, Bickford was stunned by the role of the coloreds. The coloreds, people who are not white, black people, or people with black blood. He was stunned by the role in the local church and their participation in the service, such as the choir. He recalled, a large choir drawn up in a semicircular form was led by a colored lady possessing a strong, full, and well-trained contralto voice. Of course, if this was in the 20th century and it was a male in the Methodist church, we would say probably it's Sam Brown. Well, only the Methodists would know that. Vince, you the Methodists? Right. Equally stunning, if not even more so, was the diversity of the congregation. Bickford wrote, the motley appearance of the congregation, diversity of complexional shades, naked feet of the blacks, red cotton tied headgear, fantastic hats with and without brims. A few of the whites and better to do colored of the congregation dressed up in beautiful Muslim. Muslim is a form of cloth, just like how we have Muslim is what you know the way in St. Lucia and Dominica. And in this text too, we explain that Muslim is part of Vincentian culture in another chapter. I had the opportunity to teach two persons who attended Codgerton College last week, and they were stunned of how precise the dress is, and they lamented. I see my friend here from the Methodist Church, that today people come to church fully exposed. Fully exposed. Yeah. Vibrating skates will tell you the calypso. The attraction to the church was explained by William Moyster, who was assigned to St. Vincent and the Grenadines briefly from 1837 to 1838, and again from 1843 to 44. In his memoir that was published in 1866, he said, we are now free. That's how blacks are expressing themselves, and this is what you think the blacks are saying. We must therefore all begin to serve the Lord. Why? Because it is the Lord who gave us freedom. Of course, the humanitarians keep preaching that it is the humanitarians. It is because of the love of God that slavery came to an end. And thanks to Dr. Eric Williams, we know that is not true. And thanks to many scholars, including the Trinidadian C.L.R. James, we know it is the self-liberation ethos, to use the words of Professor Sir Hilary Beckles, our Vice Chancellor. We know it is a change from industrialization, from agriculture to industrialization and so. But at the time, you can't vex with blacks. They prayed, and slavery came to an end, and they went to church. And in Moyster's view, with every hindrance now being removed, they came flocking to the house of God by scores and hundreds. To meet this increased demand, the Wesleyans had established prayer houses on almost every estate. And later on, Dr. Fraser will tell you how many estates we had enough, to use the Vincentian terminology. We had them all over. And they set up two circuits. The first circuit was the Windward Circuit, with stations at Bible, Calico, Carla, Marica, Union, and Georgetown. The second circuit is Kingston, with the Leeward District. And Fiddler spent a lot of time in the Leeward District. This phenomenon is markedly a Vincentian religious humanism that becomes entrenched in the immediate post-emancipation. Bickford's description of the testimonies of the free blacks was similar to those that reported by Fiddler. We showed you what Fiddler wrote. And those things you see are not spelling errors. Those are verbatim transcription. Okay? Where you have LOF, that's love, and that's what he heard. He heard love. And we know we Vincentians, we see things differently. It is astonishing that when I teach at UWI and I raise up my foot and I ask them, what they call on the day? Everybody say foot bottom. And the Vincentian killing themselves and laugh. And when the Vincentian say bottom foot, the whole place erupts. And it takes minutes to quiet back down. Fitz, you know these kinds of experience, of course, as a teacher at the grammar school. We had no friend but Jesus. Me love me Jesus for what he done for me. Me Jesus give me faith. Me want more faith. Me be determined to live better this year. Me will ask more, love more, pray more, and do better Christian. Covenant Day, January, we do these things, all right? And then, all years like too. Right. There's little doubt then that religion continued to be the rock on which you oppress blacks. The first reference to a people called the converted we are told was used by Dr. Thomas Cook when he visited St. Vincent in 1790. And he wrote it in his book, and so on. But later on, we use the term Shakers, penitent, converted to refer to these people. But the first reference to them was as the wilderness people. Local officials were fully aware that spiritual Baptists were gaining ground. They first were recognized as a group in 1846. And a prime example was ignorance of what was transpiring was the contradictory intelligence to London sent by the colonial governor at the time, the lieutenant governor, on the origin of the spiritual Baptists. He said, in some of the villages, a single sect numbers a large amount of votaries or devoted followers, calling themselves the wilderness people. And this is the first time we're seeing this term being used. We are seeing this in the document at that time. Okay? On the nature of the spiritual Baptist doctrine, the lieutenant governor wrote, nor am I well acquainted with this doctrine, although I believe they are somewhat akin to those of the Quakers, mingled with external demonstrations to those which are assumed by the Shakers. And they talk about the Shakers from the US and so on. But we have argued in here that all of this is erroneous. The era that they identified is color, right? But we do know that spiritual Baptists started evolved over time and from the beginning included elements of African religious practices, Christianity and other religions. Okay? Now, as I said, we are focusing on St. Vincent and the Grenadines. But we do know that anthropologists who visited St. Vincent, for example, in 1966, and again in 1970, and who did oral history interviews with spiritual Baptists, including the late Bishop Da Costa Blucher, who we call Pointer Blucher. I think all of us are young enough or old enough to remember. So this anthropologist noted that she was told that John Wesley and Charles Wesley were the originators of their religion, and that many of the elements do indeed point to a Methodist background. A later assessment was done by a branch who was a medical doctor, and he provided very, very detailed information that shows, in fact, that there are many elements of the Wesleyan church or Wesleyan practices that are in the spiritual Baptists. But why were the spiritual Baptists evicted and, as we call them, to create a separate church? It came with the arrival, as I showed you earlier, of this man, William Hudson, who came in 1849. And when he came, there was a fundamental shift in Wesleyan policy. Hudson came to the region first in 1841. He was assigned to Barbados, where there was a highly anglicized society. Remember, or if you don't know, the Methodists were chased out of Barbados. The church was burned. We know Sarah and Gill is a hero. And you know where the Methodists ran to? So St. Vincent William Shrewsbury. His wife gave a son out there on the boat or somewhere, and we have a place they call Shrewsbury House. Dr. Friday, what's the position of Shrewsbury House? We'll hear it in the next budget. Yeah, we want to know what Shrewsbury House is. It's an important cultural asset. And the religious community, especially the Methodists too, I think is something you need to look into. Okay? On the spiritual Baptists, we see, as I showed you, that it was clearly recognized that the spiritual Baptists were part of the Methodist Church. And Hudson, when he took over, he threw them out. And as he threw them out, as he evicted, they began to erect their own infrastructure. And as Dr. Denny reminds us, it is this infrastructure that allowed them to grow. Dr. Farkas makes the same point in his book. Okay? Some people have argued, including Dr. Fergus, that the Spiritual Baptist Church has to do something with Grand Sable, where 600 enslaved people were brought from the Bahamas. We didn't find that, but we did find in our work that Reverend Thomas Brown, who was in charge of Grand Sable, he, to use Vincentian language, he cursed the Wesleyan minister, Henry Payner, for permitting Spiritual Baptists to join the Wesleyan congregation. The same practices that we have today, where people go to the Methodist, Anglican, or Catholic Church in the morning, and they go to the Baptist in the evening, it was well established during this period. Right? You're guilty of that, Doctor? Right? Also, the arrival of the liberated Africans gave new impetus. They bring an African element. But we didn't find evidence that the liberated Africans took over the Spiritual Baptists. We find sufficient evidence from the Wesleyans that the local blacks were taking the liberated Africans into the fold and were taking them to the church. Okay? So essentially that is how the Spiritual Baptists emerge and give and gain ground and continue to expand until about 1912. And Dr. Fraser will take up from there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Scott, for that presentation on the origins of the Spiritual Baptist. And we are continuing swiftly along now. We have a presentation on why East Indians moved from Hinduism to Christianity. And to do this, we have Dr. Arnold Thomas. And I'll just tell you a little bit about Dr. Thomas. Dr. Thomas served in the OECS Diplomatic Corps in Europe and earned his doctorate in political science from CUNY, that's the City University of New York. He was also a professor of political science at CUNY and previously worked at the CARICOM Secretariat in Guyana as the chief of the technical assistance section. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome at this time Dr. Arnold Thomas.
Thank you very much, and good evening all. I want to continue in the same revolutionary vein that Dr. Scott and Dr. Denny have been pursuing. Revolutionary in the sense that we are looking at some very serious changes in religion in St. Vincent. And I want to switch to another group of people who also played a role in the development of Vincentian society. Between 1861 and 1880, 8 ships brought 2,474 Indians to St. Vincent under the system known as indentureship to work on estates over here. And that was because they claimed that the blacks did not want to work anymore on the sugar estates, so they had to bring in the Indians. By agreement, the Indians were allowed to practice their religion, which was mainly Hinduism. As a matter of fact, 90% of those Indians who came, that 2,400 and whatever came, 90% were Hindus. Now let me jump ahead. 150 years later, let's talk about 2024. We now have about approximately 7,000 Vincentians of Indian origin living here. Not one single Indian Vincentian is a Hindu. Can you believe that? So what happened? What happened in that period? That is the revolution we want to look at very briefly here. So the Indians came, and they came under this. It was another form of slavery, because although they came here, they were allowed to practice their religion and do a number of things. On the plantations, on the estates themselves, they were treated no differently from the blacks, right? So things didn't turn out the way the Indians expected. When the first lot went back to India in about 1874, they told the people over there, they told the authorities that they were not paid the salary that they were supposed to be paid, that they had to work so many hours, so much longer, and so on and so on and so forth. And in other words, it was not what they expected. As a result, the Indian government did not want to send any more Indians to St. Vincent. They would send to other islands like colonies like Trinidad and Guyana and so on. It was not until later that when things improved, they changed the laws and so on, that they began sending more Indians to St. Vincent. Things went a little better for the Indians, but when things went bad in the sugar industry, you know what the planters did? They took it out. They took out the bad developments, the bad conditions on the Indians. In other words, they paid them less. They want them to do more task work. And what they used to give them little things like a little bit of rum, a little bit of sugar. They said, no, 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 no. So things went very bad for the Indians. Round about 1882, the Indians started complaining to the governor about all these things that were happening on the estates, that they were not given medical treatment. Some had tuberose. You know what tuberose are? Ever heard about tuberose? Tuberose is one of those sicknesses. It's a skin disease that develops when you walk barefooted all the time. And your foot gets, you get caught and all that kind of stuff. Anyway, the Indians, they never took care of the tuberose and the eczema and all kinds of stuff that happened on the skin. So the governor got about 80 complaints and sent this guy, brought him in from St. Lucia to have a look and see what was happening down there. And he found that what they said was true, that even the so-called protector of Indians was not looking after the Indians, and things were very, very bad. But in spite of these findings, the Indians were not treated better. So on the 7th, remember this date, on the 7th of October, 1882, about 50 Indians from Argyle Estate decided to down Cutlass and Hoe and say, boy, we're going down to take our problems straight to the Governor General down there, or the administrator at the time. So 50 Indians barefooted, no cutlass, no hoe. They marched from Argyle and picked up people along the way from Stubbs, from Honnestville, and all to Kingstown. On the way, 7 of them were arrested. And why they were arrested? They were arrested because they were not given permission to leave their estates. So the 7 ringleaders were arrested and charged with the crime of vagabondism. And vagabondism means you left the estate without having a certificate to say you have permission to leave. So anyway, all of these things were happening. Most of the Indians at the time decided, no, St. Vincent is no longer going to be their home for them. So they all wanted to go back to India. And the governor said, the colonial office said, if you can't find work for them and treat them properly, send them back to India. So by 1884, a whole bunch of Indians gathered in Kingstown, and those were registered, some not registered, to wait for the boat to take them back to India. And that was a big, 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 big outflow of Indians from St. Vincent. So it's 1884. And so after 1880, no more Indians were coming into St. Vincent with Hinduism, which means that the few who are left behind and there were just a little handful left at that time. What they had to do, they had to adapt to the situation in St. Vincent. And what that means, it means that while they were here during that period, the churches, as we heard before, were proselytizing a lot to convert these Hindus from Hinduism to Christianity, because they were teaching that Hinduism was idolatry. At first, that was the Hindus said, no. We believe we have our own idea of what God is to us. But later they realized that they had to adjust to the situation in order to remain in St. Vincent. So slowly and slowly, what they did, the churches got more and more involved. The children who were born here were Christian, they were given Indian names. So how come yours surely have a name? Yours surely has a name like Thomas. So all the Indians born, all the children born in St. Vincent were given Anglo-Saxon names. That's why I would also say, you will not find one single descendant of an Indian in St. Vincent right now with an Indian name. It's Thomas, Bullock, Bacchus, Lewis, and all of that, all Anglo-Saxon names. And that all had to do with the idea of adjusting to the situation. So, slowly, and woman. And and slowly, what they had to do was to adjust to this situation. And because no further Indians were coming in, and the ones who were here were dying out, and they had to adjust to the situation. And slowly, that was the ending of Hinduism. So, just in summary, let me tell you why Hinduism failed out in St. Vincent. First, there was no critical mass. More than half the population had gone back to India, and those that remained had to adjust the situation. And there was a lot of competition among the churches to convert the Indians, particularly Wesleyans. And a lot of Indians, particularly those in Argyle Estate, became one of the largest group of Indians in the country. The Methodists became very, very, very popular out there. Another reason the loss out, Hinduism declined, was that the estate owners themselves were determined to get the Indians to be more and more accustomed to the creolized society in St. Vincent. So what they had to do, the dress change, the food change, the speech change. And more than that, Indians did not have a school to send the children to where they could learn Hinduism and other things. So as a matter of fact, in 1883, the owner of Argyle Estate started a school. But as I said earlier, in 1884, because so many went back to India, they gave up. The Indians gave up, and they had to close the school down. So that was the end of that. And given all those factors, that was the end of Hinduism in St. Vincent. And since then, it was the Catholic Church, the Anglican Church, and the Wesleyan Church in particular at that time that took over. But jump ahead to the 1930s, all of that changed when among the Indians, there was another development, and that was the development of Seventh-day Adventism in St. Vincent. So we've all gone from Hinduism to all of these various Christian religions. Thank you very much.
Quite interesting, the stories of why Indians moved from Hinduism to Christianity. Remember, you'd have an opportunity to engage the presenters in the open forum coming up soon. We move on quickly, though, to the next presentation, the very last one, done by Dr. Adrian Fraser, a former school teacher who earned his PhD in history after completing a Master of Arts at the Cave Hill University, the University of the West Indies Cave Hill campus, under the supervision of Professor Sir Woodville Marshall. He would later return to work in the regional NGO movement before moving on to head the UWI Open campus in Vincent and the Grenadines site until his retirement. Ladies and gentlemen, at this time to do the Spiritual Baptist since 1912. Let's welcome Dr. Adrian Fraser.
Thank you very much. And Well, I have to say that protocol has already been established, but I want to, having said that, welcome Dr. Noel McBarnett to a seat I had for about 20 years. So welcome, and I hope the challenges are less. I am asked to speak about the spiritual Baptist since 1912. And what it is really about is to deal with the ban, the ordinance which banned the spiritual Baptists right up to when it was repealed. And I realized that it is difficult for me to do that unless I go to the beginning to show why that ban came about in the first place. And I hope you'll forgive me because a lot of things I have to just go through very quickly without developing them. But hopefully during the discussion period, we should be able to answer whatever questions you have. What I intend to do is just to provide a sort of political perspective, looking at the struggle of the spiritual Baptists. And the ban came at what I call the commanding heights of colonialism, a period of crown colony government when there was no elected representation. And the struggle continued particularly after you had a return to elected representation, and particularly after 1935 when you had riots in St. Vincent and the emergence of George McIntosh. Then, as we go to the period 1951, the period of adult suffrage, where you had other constitutional changes, eventually leading to the appointment of a chief minister in 1959 who was Ebenezer Joshua, and he was the person who finally brought an end to the ban placed on the Shakers. And of course, we are now into independence, and we know that a few weeks ago, we had a public holiday given to the country, but because of the Baptists, a sort of reparation, in a sense, a sort of reparation. Now, quickly, why did this ban come about? We began to have Dr. Scott spoke about the origin of this spiritual Baptists or the Shakers. And I just want to point out some developments. In 1852, we have the Chief Justice regarding them as a group of fanatics. In 1862, they were associated with the riots of that year, and their chapel at Mount Bentic was actually burned by the militia. In 1881, the missionaries were reporting that on the windward side, that Shakerism had overtaken villages and estates around Georgetown and overland. But one of the things which helped to heighten the attention of the populace and particular of government officials was an article which appeared in the Century newspaper in 1901 and which spoke about the spread of the Shaker religion and about the sort of darkness of vice and superstition that was being propagated. Now, there were some concerns. The growing independence of the Shakers and black people generally, the independence of European influence, especially with the churches. And you have a Methodist missionary, Reverend Hudson, who said they insisted on holding meetings independent and separate from our own. Then we have a Reverend Branch, who is an Anglican, and at this time was based in Barley. And he said, I'm speaking about the declining influence of the of the European churches and ministers, he said, and this was given to the 1897 West Indian Royal Commission, we have an excitable, suspicious, and still ignorant laboring population drifting away from the old clerical control, as shown in the numerous new friendly societies, all self-managed, and not as hitherto directed by ministers of religion, and in the recent self-constituted religious societies. The laborer, by his lay, friendly, and religious societies, and his revolt from the healthy control of the clergy of the church and ministers of the Wesleyan body, shows he is testing the pleasure of thinking and determining for himself. So these were some of the issues. One of the doctrines which the group was preaching was equality. And to speak about equality for black people at that time sent a certain signal. There were migrant workers in the ranks, particularly at Escape, and these migrant workers were liberated Africans who had come to St. Vincent. Fiddler, who both Dr. Scott and Dr. Denny have mentioned, commented on the importance of sexual morals among the Shakers. And I mention this because one of the things they had against the Shakers was this, well, it was not a fear, this belief that when they went on their knees in the mourning houses, that a lot of sexual acts were performed. But Fiddler from very early said that, commented on the importance of sexual morals among them. Then by 1901, we have one of the newspapers coming out and printing something that really shocked a lot of people, that this movement was growing, and it was it has its roots in one of the few distinct hereditary traits of African barbarism. So from about 1901, we have being put in place a plan to officially ban the religion. The 1902 eruption came, and that probably put things back a bit. But they found that there was need for more information, so we have a medical report being solicited in 1903, which spoke about, which gave the impression that the majority of what they call lunatics at the mental asylum were Shakers. And they also asked for reports from the chief of police, first of all, the acting chief of police, who pointed out in 1905 that the Shakers had not been allowed in town. And we have, again, they were trying to build a lot of information in order to justify their banning the religion. Reverend Huckabee of the Methodist Church said that the respectable members of his church had become Shakers because they were unable to attend church due to poverty. The ordinance was drafted eventually in 1903, but one of the concerns was how were you going to ban a religion when there was supposed to be tolerance, religious tolerance? And this created quite a bit of problems. In the meantime, the Shakers were growing an arm. By 1912, when the ban eventually came about, there were probably about 40 Shaker houses from throughout the whole of St. Vincent except the Grenadines. The acting commissioner of police, in one of the reports which he submitted, said that Shakerism has its roots in one of the few distinct hereditary traits of African barbarism, which still remains to the black race of St. Vincent. So all of this was building a case for banning the religion. Another report from a Corporal Keane of the Barley Police Station focused on membership, initiation, and a lot of this information got from people in the area, particularly teachers. Now, once the idea of banning the religion came about, we have, first of all, a Rodney Allen, who was an allottee on the New Adelphi land settlement, applying for permission to build a prayer house on his allotment at New Adelphi. And the land commissioner indicated to the administrator that his strategy was to test the view that government intended to ban Shakerism. Eventually, July 8, 1912, we have the whole issue of the ban, and the administrator introduced to the legislature the bill to ban Shakerism. And one of the persons behind the eventual banning of the Shakers was Governor Gideon Murray. And we know Gideon Murray because of Murray Village and Murray Road. And I'm thankful to Dr. Fergus for putting a lot of attention on the role played by Gideon Murray. And, you know, he seemed to have been, his machinations was what eventually led to this. And as I said, I'm going to go through this part very, very quickly. So we have the ban eventually coming into being, but again, there was a lot of manipulation because Murray, in collaboration with the governor, what he did was to have the ordinance actually put in place before they had a sanction from Britain. And there's a lot of information about how this came about, which I obviously would not be able to go into. Because one of the arguments which they began to use about the Shakers was that it was not a religion, it was a cult. And Murray, according to a report, suggested that this was so because every one of those misguided people attend a recognized church. Now, what is interesting about this is that after emancipation, many of the, and really, well, even before emancipation, one of the problems was that you take, for instance, the Shakers. If you were a Shaker, in order to get into school or to get into any other, you had to be recognized by one of the accepted or recognized religions. And of course, being a Shaker meant that you had to associate yourself with one of the other churches. And we spoke about the relationship between the Shakers and the Methodists, but many of them were also involved in the Anglican and also the Catholic. Now, once, even before the ban came into place, the newspapers gave a lot of support to Murray for doing what he had done. And interestingly enough, in those newspapers, there's one called the Rambler. You ever came across the Rambler? It was a legitimate paper? Yeah, the Rambler newspaper carried a letter from one person called Tony John. And what is interesting about this, because they were building up a case that the respectable people in St. Vincent were against the practice of Shakerism. And the Rambler carried a letter by a gentleman, Tony John, all written in dialect. And the purpose of this was to show that there were also people of their ilk who were against the practice of Shakerism. So part of it says, they woke up all night and 4 the morning, they bound to steal people fruit and vegetables. Hungry belly have no conscience. And he spells conscience, C-A-N-S-H-I-A-N. Poor children left the mama house and say they're going to go and get convert. So, and this was to show that it was not only the so-called respectable people, but also others who were of the same class as the Shakers. And you have papers in the region, the Voice of St. Lucia, the Chronicle of Grenada, the Barbados Agricultural Reporter, lending support to this bill that was brought forward by Murray. The churches came in, and you had the Church of Scotland, the Methodist Church, in fact, all of the recognized churches in St. Vincent coming in support of Murray in his effort to get rid of the Shakers. And of course, I will not be able to get into how this came about. You know, I'll have to leave that for another time. But the ordinance went to England after it had already been gazetted in St. Vincent without official sanction. Eventually, it was decided, and there was an effort by Murray and some of his friends to ensure that this happened. So the ordinance was allowed to remain, but it would be reviewed after a year before it eventually got official sanction. And this was in 1912. A few months after, in 1913, we had the first case in Kittels where 6 persons were charged, 5 were convicted, and this was 3 weeks after they were being convicted. Murray submitted his report to England, and the whole idea, because in order to get official sanction, he would have to send a report back to England. So this report was to show them that the ban was serving its purpose. So we move now, and they had, you have your number, can you just put that with it? I'm just going to show okay, let me see if I find what's happening? Okay. This way. I'm just going to show the number of people who were prosecuted since 1912. I don't have it elsewhere. Yeah. So you have in 1920 9, 8 of them from Camden Park, 1923, 23, 1925, 18, 1926, 1, 1927, 2, 28, 29, 32, no conviction, 1931, 1931, 1, 1933, 35, 1934, 94, and 1935, 14. It's interesting, those figures for 1933 to 1935, because at that time, the whole political atmosphere in St. Vincent was changing, and they were getting more support, and that emboldened the Shakers to continue to practice their religion, even though there was a ban. But 1935 was an important turning point, because that is the period of the riots and the emergence of George McIntosh in the Legislative Council. McIntosh got into the Legislative Council with his Working Men's Association in 1937, won all the seats, and immediately by 1939 he began to advocate for a repeal of the Shaker Ordinance. Now, the administrator in 1939 informed the governor that McIntosh had brought forward a motion to repeal the Shaker Ordinance. He said it was discussed in the Executive Council, which unanimously advised that it should not be accepted by government. And he pointed out that in that fourth motion in 1939, all the ex officio members voted against it, but it was carried by one vote because all of McIntosh's men, 6 of them, I think, voted with the support of one nominated member, a planter, A.M. Fraser. I was never sure why Fraser took that particular position. But, so you had a situation where it was carried, but because of the constitutional situation at that time, everything was left to the governor and to the administrator. And McIntosh gave notice of introducing a bill to give effect to the above, because even though they had victorious, nothing was done because everything was in the hands of the administrator and the governor. So McIntosh gave notice of introducing a bill to give effect to what had happened. And the Executive Council advised him that government should not agree. And should it be passed by, they said that if this new bill by McIntosh was passed by a majority vote, that the governors should, his assent should be withheld. And that is why I talk about putting this in a political perspective, because that was a period of Crown Colony government, though by that time, colonialism still, it was no longer Crown Colony government. But the governor could withhold his assent, even though it was passed by a majority of elected members. And he pointed out that if such a motion again was passed, or it was divided because A.M. Fraser, who had given them support, was on holidays, and the new nominated member was going to support the government side. So they decided that the governor should agree that there will be a casting vote against it, because this represented the majority of responsible opinion, even though the legislature had made a decision. Responsible opinion in St. Vincent was against it. But there were other developments which which emboldened the Shakers. There was a report on cases of Shaker meetings being held in Kingstown. And interestingly enough, One of the places in Kingston where the Shaker meeting was being held was in the yard of George McIntosh. And George McIntosh was not only fighting it in the Legislative Council, he was also using the newspapers, because the Century newspaper and the Times newspaper, which before the ban was strongly in favor of the government, was now owned by members of McIntosh's Working Men's Association, Ebenezer Duncan and Bonady. So George McIntosh began to write regularly, and he got support from the papers themselves through their editorial. So there was this meeting in McIntosh's yard, even though they were not supposed to be having meetings in Kingston. And McIntosh, in replying both in the newspapers and in the legislature, said, "Great and many have been the hardships imposed on the oppressed working class people of the colony for trying to serve God as their only consolation for the half-starved, naked, miserable, and deplorable condition in which they have been kept." He noted that ministers of religion were moving around trying to get persons to sign a petition urging the government that even though McIntosh had won in the Legislative Council, that they must not go along with that. There were other developments too. In 1940, the Times newspaper reported on an incident in Barley where 40 persons were brought to court for practicing Shakerism. And they started to shake. And the magistrate, Cox, was embarrassed, didn't know what to do. He eventually gave them a long address and advised them to give up the practice, which was injurious to themselves. Now, the person behind this was McIntosh. When McIntosh heard about these 40 people who were being tried in Barley, he went down and he asked them, "Are you conscientious that this is how you should serve God?" They said, "Yes." He said, "Well, you could be a martyr to your own cause. If you are put in prison, there's nothing to prevent you from shaking." And that is when they began to shake, and Cox, the magistrate, was not expecting anything like that. So the case was eventually dismissed. Then there was a case in South Windward where the police entered a home, met this lady at the side of her bed, praying with her husband who was ill. They arrested her and charged her, but only fined her 1 shilling, which meant that he realized that the whole thing was just ridiculous. And he eventually said that council should look into the matter and, if necessary, repeal the law. So I'm now showing that with the change in times, you have a lot more people coming out in support of the Shakers and urging the removal of the ban. He said, this is what the magistrate said, "If necessary, let them repeal the law," because he considered that the sect should be granted religious toleration. Within the church also, we began to have changes. In 1945, the Anglican bishop, in a letter to the administrator, said, "Repressive measures do more harm than good. I never believe it does good to drive any practice underground if it can be avoided." So we have things moving in support of the Shakers. The administrator in 1949 decided to put the ball into the hands of the churches, asked them to come up with recommendations. You had some of the same old views about Shakerism being coming up again. And what McIntosh said, and which is true, that one of the reasons why a lot of these churches, Anglican and Methodist, were against the Shakers was that they were moving out of the churches and they depended a lot on the revenue they got from these people, which, as McIntosh said, helped to pay the ministers. What they wanted to save, what the churches wanted to save, was really their collection and not souls. But by the late 1940s, there was a change of strategy. And what they were arguing is that this ban was against the Shakers. Let us change the names. So we have the Spiritual Baptists in 1949 applying for and holding a procession in Georgetown, which attracted between 2,000 and 4,000 people. The police were present. And when in 1950, they decided to have another procession in Kingston, the same Spiritual Baptists, the police prevented them, the government prevented them, and McIntosh was again up in arms against this, because what they were saying is that this religion, which called itself the Spiritual Baptist religion, was really the Shakers using another name. All of this angered McIntosh, and McIntosh in 1950 called for the removal of the administrator and the chief of police. What I find interesting about this is 1950 in the legislature. Here is a member of the legislature asking that they remove the administrator and the chief of police. In 1950, McIntosh asked for the removal of the superintendent of police because these depressed people, finding no relief from their disadvantages, resort to desperation, and you need to get rid of the superintendent of police. He was warned that he should withdraw those remarks, and what McIntosh said is that I've already said it, so it stands. And you had a lot of that going on, and McIntosh said, I see no reason why a lunatic of a superintendent of police should stop them. He's calling the superintendent of police a lunatic, and that is when they said, those remarks are out of order. McIntosh went on, and he quoted a famous poem by a Jamaican poet and writer, Claude McKay. If we must die, oh, let us nobly die, so that the very monsters we defy shall be constrained to honor us, though dead. And this was by a Jimmy, and there was McIntosh quoting him in the legislature. In 1951, MacDonald Williams, pastor of the Christian Pilgrim Church, submitted an application to be a marriage officer, and it was approved, provided he could satisfy the crown attorney and the registrar that he understood the requirements of the marriage ordinance and was qualified educationally to carry it out. And interestingly enough, the person who signed this approval was Henry Williams, who was once a resident tutor at the center. They said that if government is satisfied that by changing the name, it will do some good, and we are prepared once we recognize that they are not the Shakers. So a lot of that went on until we got to the repeal, and I've just had to skip out a lot of this. But the repeal eventually came again with a change in the Constitution, where, first of all, in 1955, after adult suffrage, Joshua moved a resolution asking that the ordinance be repealed. It was passed, and nothing happened because of the Constitution of that time. It was passed by 10 votes against none, with 1 abstention. In 1965, Joshua again moved a bill for repeal. But the situation was different. Joshua was at that time a chief minister. And it is interesting because in moving that motion for the repeal, McIntosh said, he referred to 1912, and he said that a governor was coming along Cane Garden Road, and there was a bell that had an awe-inspiring sound when it was rung, and the horses plunged, and that is all that made it possible to put this on the statute book. He was saying that the governor fell from his horse because of the bell rung by the Shaker, because there was Shaker Church going up to Cane Garden. Now, there's no evidence that this actually happened. But if anybody knows Joshua, and knows Joshua very well, Joshua had a lot of stories to tell. Joshua, for instance, a good friend of mine who is now departed, Kenneth John, decided to enter politics, and Joshua eventually named him Anti-Pim Pim. And some of you would know the name Anti-Pim Pim. So Joshua always had those kind of stories. So he was talking about the governor being thrown off, or this is what happened. But importantly enough, in 1965, he also had the support of the leader of the opposition, who was Milton Cato. Milton Cato came back to St. Vincent. Well, he said when he was speaking on that motion, Milton Cato said 17 years before, that is 65, 70, which would be 1948, he had won a case for the Shakers. I think there was an error there, because Milton Cato actually came back to St. Vincent on Christmas Day, 1948. He was accepted at the Middle Temple in England in absentia, and he was called to the bar in Barbados on the 17th of December, 1948. But he was successful in one of these cases. But by that time, there was very little effort made by the authorities to continue to convict the Shakers. But we know that in 1965 it happened, and since 1965 we had National Spiritual Baptist Day, May 1994, and we have a holiday in 2024 because we are now into independence. So the point I was trying to make is that you started with the banner during the highlights of colonialism, particularly the Crown Colony government. Then when you got to the reintroduction of elected representation, we began to have some changes, particularly after 1935. And with those changes taking place, the Shakers felt emboldened to continue to practice their religion. And, you know, in 1965, there was nothing that could be done to prevent it once it had passed through the Legislative Council. So this is roughly, and as I said, I've just had to skip out a lot of things because of the time. Thank you very much.
Quite a colorful history for the Spiritual Baptist Day. Thank you so much for that, Dr. Fraser. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we transition quickly into the open forum segment, and to invite us to engage in a meaningful dialogue. This is an opportunity for us to reflect on some of the themes that came out tonight. And without further ado, your thoughts, your questions, your insights are now welcomed. So the way we'll do this, if you'd like to make a contribution, you simply indicate, the mic would be brought to you, you make your comment, ask your question, and if need be, one of the presenters will respond. All right, so we have some change in the instruction. Oh, never mind. All right, go ahead, please, sir.
Thank you very much. Thanks to all of the presenters. Excellent presentations. My name is Claudius Ferraz, and I'm here for the launch of my book. I've done quite a lot of research in the National Archives mainly, but other places as well as some oral research. I want to say here now in this audience that foundational to my work was the work of Dr. Fraser, thank you very much, sir, and the deceased Edward Cox. I was not aware that he had passed away, but he was also very important to the early phases of my work. Okay, so having said that, I want to submit, really, very controversially, I'm sure, that when I read the original brochure, not this one, the one that is online, it says Europeans brought Christianity to St. Vincent, Africans Africanized the Christianity. I want to submit that Europeans did not bring Christianity, quote unquote, to St. Vincent. What they brought was a European version of Christianity. And that is important because when you look at this brochure, which is the same thing online, the top right-hand corner, you see an image there that is very telling. I showed my daughter this image last night. I said, what do you think this is? Is this an angel or a devil? She said, an angel. I said to her, I think this is a devil, you know. I think this is a devil. How do you know this is an angel? She said, well, you see the wings are golden. What she didn't want to say was that the face is also the face that we know of the slave master. And this is very important. The deification of these images took place during the Renaissance. Period. That is the Christianity they brought to the Caribbean. It was not the Christianity they taught themselves. There were slave catechisms. There was even a slave Bible in the same time that they were developing the missionary enterprise in St. Vincent. There was a Bible that was written by the Anglican Church to send out to the colonies. We call it the Slave Bible, which selectively printed certain chapters, omitted certain chapters, omitted certain sections of certain books, and so on. This was particularly meant to reinforce this image that we see here. Subservience, and also hatred of one's own skin. It's not by accident that black people hate things African. Even hate their own skin if you read Fanon, Frantz Fanon, Black Skin, White March. Now, there are elements that I want the presenters to consider, and for example, Dr. Scott referred to it. There were 600 people on the Grand Sahib estate who were Baptists. Now that is something that intrigued me for years. I thought, how could Methodist practitioners transform into the spiritual Baptists when the fundamentals are so different? For example, from infant baptism to adult or credo baptism. What was the basis of it? I couldn't find it anywhere. Because in Trinidad, we know you had over 500 Baptists, mainly Baptists, coming out of the American-British War of 1812. We know that. They were mainly Baptists. And they were the foundation to what became the spiritual Baptists. In Jamaica, we also had Baptists from North America moving there. In the Bahamas, the foundation of the Black Christian church is the American Baptist. Yet I couldn't find anything in St. Vincent until I got this document that spoke to the movement from the United States to the Bahamas to St. Vincent, 600 Baptists. They were unable to establish physical churches, but they were there. The missionaries from time to time recorded them, spoke to them. So that is a factor in the making of St. Vincent Christianity that we need to consider. Those Baptists were a larger number than those that came to Trinidad. They were larger than those that went to Jamaica to establish the Jamaica Church, which still exists today. So that is a factor I think you should consider. I know people want to speak, so I'll say one more thing. In terms of Africanization of Christianity, a lot of that also came out from Africa. A lot of the Africans who were put on slave ships were Christians. We know that. So it was not only that Europeans brought Christianity, but Africans also brought Christianity to the Caribbean. Some of those must have been in St. Vincent. The liberated Africans, a lot of them came out of that Congo Christian area there, which had been Christian since the end of the 15th century. We know the church lasted until the 18th century. The slave trade ended at the beginning of the 19th century for the British colonies. So it's expected that a number of those from Benin, you had Christianized people there. From the Gold Coast, you had Christianized people there from the early 16th century. So that is a factor that would have, in a sense, been, a dynamic in the transformation of the European version of Christianity that they brought into the present-day expressions of Christianity in St. Vincent, as well as in other parts of the Caribbean. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Fergus. Among other things, he put forward the notion that the Europeans didn't bring Christianity. They brought the European version of Christianity. And we do wish you all the very best in the launch of your book. There's another contribution. Go ahead, please.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Edgar Lewis. My registered name is Kwame. I will suggest that if you want to look, as Renwick Rose teaches, if you want to know and discuss anything, you look at the social origin. And if you look for the social origin of Christianity, you will see it come up to the Ethiopian Christian Orthodox Church, the Ethiopian Christian Coptic. Anybody have a phone now could go and Google to try to find out the social origin. You'll see. They tell you the Ethiopian Coptic Church. I said this also to link the Ethiopian Christianity to the Baptist, because if you look at the Ethiopian Orthodox Catholic Church where worship, you will see they have bell, the drum, and the hair wrap. And also we like to look at the movement, the slave in Cuba and Haiti. All these people have an interpretation similar, because in Trinidad they had the Shango. That is the Cuban Santa Rosa. These have similar trait to our Baptists, because they actually catch the spirit. So we have to look at the Christianity as social origin from Africa, and the movement of people and development of science and technology will introduce new practice. And so I suggesting that yes, we must have a new interpretation of Christianity based on our quest to create a new civilization, in the sense that we're talking about a post-colonial society. When we're looking at 2034 will be the 200th anniversary of our freedom from slavery. So we have to start to analyze our history and try to evolve something that could accommodate our new dispensation. So I would like to stay there today.
All right, thank you so very much for that contribution, Kwame. Are there any more? Just kindly raise your hand, indicate. All right, there's one from the parliamentary representative for this area.
Thank you very much, Marla. Good night to everybody again. Let me take this opportunity as well to welcome you to the constituency of East Kingston. You are in this constituency.
Well, we thank you.
I just want to reference, Dr. Denny, you referenced you made reference to the African philosophy of reward for faith as a here and now expectation versus the white religions or the Wesleyans' reward for faith as a hereafter, what I call a hereafter excitement. Now, many persons in our society are of the view that the influence of the church is really sort of laced with a fair degree of ineptitude to combat or to confront many of the social injustices and social undesirables, non-progressive and non-developmental realities that we face today. Some people also believe that leads to, or that is contributing to, an inordinately high incidence of social decadence. For example, you hear commentary about the influence or lack thereof of the Christian Council, of the Pentecostal Assembly of the West Indies, and these other religious organizations. And to some degree, I believe there is credence to some of this concept and commentary that we hear. I want to make it more contemporary. For example, in my own constituency, not too far from here, St. Vincent experienced its first mass murder. 5 men were gunned down. And many people up to today are still asking, where's the voice of the church on that issue? Our young women and young girls and women, continue to experience the harsh and undesirable treatment and abuse by men in our society. In my own constituency here of East Kingstown, in the last 3 years, we had brutal murders of 3 young women in my constituency. And I have constituents up to today asking me, where is the voice of the church? And this is not a reflection of my position, so I don't want anybody to castigate me and say that I am criticizing the church. But I am presenting this impression by many Vincentians to try to see if I can get a reaction, maybe from some of the panelists. I know we have some church leaders in the audience. Maybe they would care to comment on it. But it's a real and to some extent existential danger if we embrace the concept that the influence of the church has been weakened to the extent that the social decadence and the challenges that we face become even more difficult for us to deal with. I would be interested to hear some response if possible.
Well, there are historical questions which deserve historical answers. And if they are non-historical questions, then you get a non-historical answer. Okay? And the first frame that I put in place is and it was not a criticism, it is a description of Christianity where the reward is deferred. That is to say, the goal is to go to heaven. But to go to heaven, you have to die. Unless you reach that point in Revelation where, you have everyone just simply heading to heaven. But broadly speaking, the fundamental principle is that to go to heaven, you have to die, and so on. And there's nothing particularly European about that either, because the faith itself didn't emerge in Europe. It emerged in the Middle East. Okay? And Africans were Christians long before Europeans, in terms of the earliest iterations of the faith. In the first centuries of the faith, there were Africans who were fundamental in the elaboration of Christian principles, and so on. When we speak of the European Christianity in the context of Black Vincentians or Caribbean people, we are really speaking of the sub-Saharan Africans, who, as much as Dr. Fergus makes the point, which is quite well made, that there were Africans who were Christians who arrived here and so on. It is equally true and far more true that the vast majority of West Africans were not Christians in sub-Saharan Africa. Okay, and so for many of them, it was a kind of first contact situation, and that the faith to which they held to, and which they experienced as part of their lived reality, all the wonderful experiences in their lives could be and they were explained as part of the benevolence of the divinities in their lives. Okay, so in that sense, I was making a historical point as to how in the instance of the Caribbean and the Americas in general, you have different forms of hybridization where African ideas and Christian forms or European forms of Christianity intersected together, and hence you have new realities coming into existence. As to what that means for this modern moment, which is your concern, and how the church intervenes in this modern moment, then clearly the best people to answer that would be the church leaders.
All right, thank you. We have another contribution, Zoila Ellis-Brown.
I really want to thank the presenters for a very well-researched presentation. I think that a lot of information that came out today was extremely helpful, interesting, but quite disturbing in terms of how much this is known in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, particularly amongst the young people and the general population. I hope the history book will address that. My question is, though, how do the panelists perceive the impact of this very disturbing history of discrimination against the spiritual Baptists and its impact on spiritual Baptists today? And in other words, how has this historical backdrop affected the strength of the spiritual Baptist movement, and what are the possibilities for redress and reparation for the spiritual Baptist community?
Who would like to take this question?
Thank you very much. The question you ask can be asked about the Garifuna. It can be asked of people of East Indian descent. It can be asked of all aspects of society. The fact is that the process which we're undertaking is, for the very first time, we have a concerted effort to document and share the experiences of Vincentian, Garifuna, and all the other sections, including the Portuguese, who we call the Portuguese. We have an incident in Middle Street in 1857 where a black man went to sell cheese in Middle Street, and the Portuguese shopkeeper come out and tell him to move. And the man refused to move, and the shopkeeper take the cheese and throw it away. Within 10 minutes, the entire store, well, according to the police report, was destroyed. And they don't know where these 200 black people came from and destroyed the man's store. And the next day, the Portuguese man wrote a letter to the police commissioner and said, listen, I lost all of these thousands of pounds and I want compensation. And he had another visit. And by the evening, he wrote a letter and said, forget about it. Forget about it. I went around to say to you that as societies that come from the colonial period into the post-colonial period, we'd have all of these challenges. The question, for example, that Fitz asks about the role of the church in the 21st century, if I show you the role of the church in 1854, when for the very first time, and I'll talk about East Indians marching, for the very first time we had a labor protest of freed people, island-wide, and the governor sent a letter to the churches and said, these are the things you should preach on Sunday. You should remind people that the Bible says you must be obedient and respect the law. Somebody laughing. You see, this is the type of history. When you tell people things, they don't believe you. They have to see it in writing. So in this process of decolonization, which started in 1979 for St. Vincent and Grenadines with official independence, and we are in 2024, we have to have a commitment to decolonize the mind, to decolonize the archive, to decolonize the city, to decolonize the country. And personally, I think we're moving too slow, right? Because as a former teacher, as a history lecturer, it becomes very painful that when you're telling people things. For example, reparations, people tell you, oh, waste of time. How could reparations be a waste of time when Dr. Fraser would tell you in 1835, a man on Grand Sable Estate said, I stop work because I don't work enough for me, my children, and my children. And a woman say, you're supposed to work now from 6 to 6, I stop work. And they drag her away and the woman say, 6 to 6. 626. And that's all I heard as the police dragging her away. Right? We need a greater commitment to decolonization. We need to be part of this process. Too many of us sit and we want other people to do it. We want politicians to do it. We want teachers to do it. We want the church to do it. Right? You could imagine in 2024 we still have Victoria Park? What? We still have Victoria Park? We still have knighthoods? Huh? And Murray Village? Come on, people. We need to quicken the pace of decolonization. Right? Bob Marley have left us. He have left us with a major, rallying song. Emancipate yourself from mental slavery. And it ain't his words, but he put it in song for us.
Yeah, in responding to you, unfortunately, many of the spiritual Baptist people know little about what happened. And there were some other things working against them. One is that they were poor people. A lot of the middle-class blacks refused to identify with them because they were seeing beyond the Shakerism thing. These were poor people. It is only in recent times that we began to have professionals and other people identifying with the so-called Shakers. The propaganda that was being spread is that what they were doing, these were traits of African barbarism, and this is something which came out of slavery at a time when the Europeans were still trying to maintain control. The church was a very important factor. And once you have these people developing their own leadership independent of the European church, then it presented some problems to the authorities. So I think we have to put it in that kind of context. Also, little was said about the economic situation. That was also key to what was happening at that time, and to the position in which even the church found itself, because here were these people who could not afford to dress properly to go to church, who could not afford to pay the fees, having their own churches, with the result that the established churches were getting less revenue to pay their priests and so on. So it's that broad context. And also within that, the whole political situation is very important in understanding what happened to the spiritual Baptists. And it is good that today we are able to recognize and to give them a holiday. And I don't think many of them appreciate what had happened, which has led to this. And when I had first written the book on the spiritual Baptists, it was written really in a style, not as an academic book, but something that ordinary Shakers or spiritual Baptists could read and realize the situation out of which they came. So, that is a very broad context, and we have only touched on bits of it. Thank you.
I would make one more point. It seems to me that history unfolds. There's a sequence, okay? And we want to be able to tell that story. And as we tell that story, we have to ask ourselves, what is the significance of that story? Okay? And if you take, in this specific instance, the trajectory of spiritual Baptists, we see how they emerge. We see how they were ostracized, oppressed. And we see how that oppression was transformed, how they regained their freedom to worship. To me, that's a heroic story. That's a glorious story. That tells of triumph over odds. Okay? It had been a hidden story. So, while I understand, okay, because my mother is a spiritual Baptist, my grandmother was a Methodist, Okay, and my brothers are all kinds of things, and sisters. Okay, so I understand all of that. But there is no question that in telling the story, you have to have that trajectory, which is, and know that spiritual Baptist was once upon a time this religion which was placed on the outskirts, on the margins, which was criminalized. No, it's not. And so in that sense, we reclaim our history. We tell our story for ourselves. And ultimately, it's not a spiritual Baptist story. It's a Vincentian story. It's a Caribbean story. It's something for all of us.
Okay, thank you. I recognize a comment from J.K.L.
Good evening, everyone. First and foremost, I always give thanks for space like this where we're able to commune among the generations. So I start by sending a share there. I welcome particularly the conversations that were happening and the points of reference within this new publication. As a young grad student and performance artist myself, who have been particularly interested in how in performance and the sacred and popular performative traditions of the Vincentian space. I welcome the publication mainly because it has been very difficult for me as a young student to find particular published research, save and except for Dr. Fraser's book on Vincentian Shakerism, to borrow that word, though I don't like to use it. Dr. Scott, in your setting of the context, you made it clear that the purpose of this evening was one of decolonization, where we are viewing how enslaved Vincentians were able to advance their decolonization process. And maybe this is a call to action, maybe as we close the night. As a young student myself, I have a sort of a love-hate relationship now with academia, where we would sit and we would talk in these beautiful halls and we would use all the jargons. And at the end of the day, the people that we are talking about and the cultures that we are writing about, they themselves have no idea what we are talking about. So I say it's a call to action because as an artist, I see that there is where the story and the impact of, as Mrs. Ellis Brown would have raised, can continue. Seldom in our space in St. Vincent, there's a collaboration between the artist and the traditional intellectual. And I guess maybe in academia that issue is still being worked through, where there's this preference for traditional published material as opposed to arts-based things that now continues the conversation in a more contemporary space. And my final point is one of offering collaboration, where there are young artists, young contemporaries who are trying to raise these important conversations and continue this decolonization process, but seldom, most times, do we ever share space with the intellectuals and the elders in our spaces. So where do we find you? There's oftentimes an elitist sort of an operation and sometimes undertone to academic spaces. And I trust that with this new publication, we are able to fix that and collaborate to continue this process.
Thank you very much. There's an article that the late Professor Rex Nettleford, former Vice Chancellor, wrote about the Caribbean artists. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but I will say to you that there's a generation of intellectuals, including myself, in the academy and outside. Now, the publication that we're working on, we have in it, for example, all these examples of Calypso in St. Vincent, almost anything we talk about. We have in the dress.
If you want to hear Vincentians cuss, listen to Vincentians in the 19th century, the police report that we could cuss. So the earliest examples of Vincentian obscenities, you could find them in our book as well.
All right, so in the interest of time, we're going to have to wrap up soon. So make this one quick, please.
One more thing I want to make a point. Now, remember, Rome used to practice paganism. And remember, they used to persecute the Christian. And remember, Constantine used, when he had the power struggle with the elite, he took up the cross and mobilized the masses to overthrow Rome. And then here from the Nicene Conference, we had Christianity becoming the Roman, predominant Christian, the Roman religion. I'll make this point to say that religion, our philosophy, always come into contradiction with the old existing order and a new emerging philosophy or religion does emerge, and there will be conflict. So in this context of St. Vincent, why are we talking about Baptist Day? Is a call again for we as a people to forge oneness and one civilization, and are talking about making a contribution to the art movement. The dramatists, the poet, the songsters have to champion the call, drumming for spiritual, mental, and post-colonial construction. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, thank you. And here is where we wrap up the evening with the vote of thanks. So we now call on Sharon Gary, Marketing Officer Acting at the UWI Global Campus, St. Vincent and the Grenadines.
Thank you, brilliant. Thank you, Mala. 1 Thessalonians 5:16-18, rejoice always, pray continually, give thanks in all circumstances, for this is God's will to you in Jesus Christ. So this is where we give thanks. And being a religious theme, my neighbor, being a religious theme, you know, we heard about the struggles of our forefathers and the faith and how church helped them. And today we are grateful that they have given us this fundamental being. Dr. Godwin Friday, leader of the opposition, we thank you for being here, always supportive. Next time, maybe you will present. His Excellency Francisco Perez Santana, Andrenia Bermudez, his lovely wife, always supportive as well. Give them a round of applause. Gracias. Ambassador of the Republic of Venezuela to St. Vincent and the Grenadines. The Honorable Fitz Bramble, Parliamentary Representative for East Kingstown. We know you wanted to go to another route, but we're staying on this track. We're staying on this track, but thank you for trying. Reverend Philbert Daly, Superintendent of the Kingstown Chateaubriand Circuit in the Methodist Church. Put your hands up in the air. Give some excellent sermons. Thank you so much for coming. Father Mark De Silva, always, yes, no, we will mention you. Thank you, Father Mark, for always showing up as well and being supportive. Rev at the Methodist Church as well. Oh, my Monty Mall, thank you for coming as well. Thank you. Zoila Ellis Brown, I think she left. Thank you for always pursuing the area of Garifuna, helping us understand. Dwight Venner, I call him number one. One time I went to an assignment and he was the MC. He was okay. So from then on, I called him number one. Joff, thank you. Thank you for your family. Thank you for your brother. Thank you for coming out. Ms. Radhika Stevens, representative of the Department of Culture. She emphasized the importance of the rock and the power of God. Head of Site of the University of the West Indies, Global Campus, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Dr. Risa Noel McBarnett. Give her a round of applause. She came into installment from the 1st of October. She has been making an impact. She's going to get vexed with me, but don't tell her I said this, okay? Close your ears. She's like, Sharon, what about refreshments? What about water? My apologies. That is something that I oversighted, and we will look into that, all right? So, but we got a lot of food for thought today, all right? All right. UWI staff. Hardworking UWI staff. Sometimes, we take people for granted. Hardworking, seeing us if I start, Sylvanus, Pat, Samantha, Ronnie, Nevon. I'm going to call names. You miss somebody. Samantha, Nevon, Sam, yes, I mentioned Sam. We all thank you. Miss Chance, thank you for always being so supportive. Sometimes we take people for granted and just don't want to take you for granted. Security, everyone. Cleaners, everyone. All right, affiliates of UWI, we thank you as well. From St. Augustine, Dr. Fergus, give him a round of applause. He wanted to do his own thesis, but we had to wrap it up a bit, right? Kenneth Vibrating Skates Aline, such an icon. Give him a round of applause. Mr. Independence. And who remembers this commercial he did? Bim, bidim, bidim, bim, bim, bim. So that's what I call him. He did a commercial. So once I say bim, yes, Fanta. So I call him Mr. Independence and Mr. Bim, bidim, bidim, bim, bim, bim. And he sings along. Rose Hall Drummers. What an impactful, from the core. You felt it. Safe journey home, Rose Hall Drummers. Powerful. Our esteemed panelist, Dr. Gary, reminding us that there's something remarkable in the Vincentian heritage, the Vincentian blood who fought off enslavement. Thank you so much. Liberation, the spirit of liberation. Dr. Cleve Scott, Mr. Turn Me On. Kevin Little song, he helped to produce it. And other songs, he's worked on many other songs, very culturally spirited as well. Thanks for highlighting the Wesleyan Church, giving us a very colorful description of what it was back then. Thank you so much. Dr. Arnold Thomas, very unassuming, but a lot of knowledge there. And we have to thank him for always highlighting his own ancestry and the people, the Indians, who did a lot for this country as well. The struggle from Argyle, very impactful. And I haven't heard about Tobo in a while, so I kind of chuckled when I heard about Tobo. So thank you for giving us that colorful outline. Dr. Adrian Fraser, round of applause for this man. Once again, we sometimes take people for granted. We thank you, Dr. Fraser, for always being willing to contribute. Former head of site, you're still willing to contribute. And we thank you for highlighting what the struggle was for the Baptist Church. I will respect the Baptist Church. All right? The media. Thank you, Cap Balcom. Thank you. You see that man right there? Excellence in terms of quality programming, and his wife, quality streaming, and he is generously giving others the opportunity to stream as well. So VC3, API, Nice Radio, Monty Stream, NBC Radio, we all thank you. You all have been on these platforms. All right? And WeFM. All right? So you can look back and see on our UWI Global Campus site, UWI Global Campus in Vincent the Grenadines Facebook site, and UWI Global Campus Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. Yes, please. And those viewing and listening at home, we thank you as well. We know you could make it. I know Reverend Leopold, he was in Grenada. He wanted to make it. I know Bishop Melville Pompey, he wanted to be as well. Thank you for those looking and listening. We appreciate you. Lastly, we thank you all for being here. Thank you for making your presence felt. And, well, just wait. Thank you for making your presence felt. We thank you and we wish you to go home well and have a safe journey. But of course, don't think I forgot you. Looking all lovely. Thank you so much, Marla Nanton. Give her a round of applause again. Marla, thank you. And she stepped in, said, Marla, not me today. Can you take? No problem, Sharon. Just give me bam, bam, bam. That's what you're talking about. Excellence. All right? Thank you, everyone.
Have a happy independence. We love you and we appreciate you. Get a safe journey home. All right? Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
No.